this is going to be an exciting session because we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. I bet if you even go to pet shows, there's a slight chance that you hear discussions about how AI is going to make your dog or cat healthier. So in this sector, first of all, let me remind you, we are having a polling for this session as well. So if you want to scan the QR code somewhere on the screen, and we can discuss the results at the second half of the session. So the question is pretty simple. It's like yes or no question. So will AI save or destroy your planet? Either save it through innovative sustainability technologies, of course, or destroy it through bad actors or intensive energy consumption. We're probably not going to touch about back sector part, but we're definitely going to talk about sustainability. So we have the great panelists here. They are Maya, Harry, and Parag. Welcome, guys. So I guess the first question is, how do you think AI is important for your respective areas in terms of helping your clients and helping your company to grow their business?
Look, I think AI and technology more broadly is a massive accelerant to what is a very difficult problem that the world is trying to grapple with. Thinking about climate change, thinking about how do you actually get to net zero while growing your business. Nobody wants to trade off business growth with reduction in emissions. So the way we look at it at Terrascope is we think that AI is the accelerant to get the information into people's hands on what to do next, where to spend time, where are the emissions in their companies coming from, and how do you trade off business growth and emission reduction. So we think that AI is a very important part of growth in business as well as solving climate change, right? So both of those are AI is an accelerant too.
Right. I'll add to that. The problems for which AI would be most useful, as you can imagine, are the most complex problems. Otherwise, we wouldn't need AI necessarily. But however, complexity is a moving target. Take meteorology, trying to predict the weather. It's very difficult to do even 3 days out, let alone 7, 10 days out. Google has just released a model saying that they have a 10-day out accurate model. I think it was released a few weeks ago. It didn't work last week, as far as I could tell. So it's extremely difficult to grapple with complex systems such as the biosphere, there are ecosystems, and certainly climate on a long-range basis because things are always changing. Right now in climate modeling, companies like ours and pretty much everyone uses a certain standard called the CMAP6 climate model. Then you'll have CMAP7, CMAP8. You will see dramatic changes year to year in what the scientific consensus is on what is expected to happen in our shared scenario pathways, SSPs, in the next couple of years, partially because we're using more AI to harness all of the different data sources, hundreds and hundreds of them, and reconcile them and harmonize them, standardize them, and so forth. So AI is being used, and increasing use of AI is shifting the baselines that are coming out of the data, which is going to change, obviously, how we respond to it, which is going to change what happens in the system. And then we're going to need, so AI isn't some kind of independent actor, it's part of the of that complex world we live in. So for us, it's very, very important as a tool for trying to downscale the staggering amount of data and put it down to a geographical coordinate level so that asset managers, investors can have some degree of comfort, reliability. Explainability is obviously crucial as well as to what will happen where in the next few years, because you have to try to factor in what the physical impact of climate change is going to be on the geography of your assets.
Right. Can you guys give us typical examples of how your clients are using AI at this stage?
So let's maybe start by saying Terrascope is essentially a SaaS platform that helps companies go from not knowing their emissions to actually knowing what their carbon emissions are at a whole of company level, or even at a product level if they're a manufacturer, to then saying, what are the models and the simulations that will actually tell me what can I do to change my emission profile? Can I actually get to net zero by 2040, 2050, whatever that goal looks like? And what is it going to take for me in terms of changes that I have to make in the physical world, right? So this is a very typical journey for a large enterprise that we work with. It's a very difficult journey, right? I have to admit that this notion of net zero, while we all talk about it, is a long, hard process that requires commitment across multi-year, multi-decade sometimes, and also requires willingness to change across many teams within a company. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? We work with, let's say, a hospitality group here, Companion Group, and they've actually used the platform to be able to start first with assembling all of the data across many resorts that they had, to then say, what is it that we would change? Where are the emissions coming from? Where are my hotspots? And a large proportion of emissions came from energy at the resorts, which is somewhat intuitive, but there was a large part that came from food, because they're actually serving F&B. Now, the interesting part is that most people would think whatever is consumed the most is probably contributing to most emissions, but it's not true. Fruits were probably being consumed the most at the resort, but beef was actually the largest contributor to emissions. So with that, how does a company like that now change the actions of what they put on their menu? How do they actually market everything to their consumers? How do they prioritize? What requires investment today versus tomorrow, right? Going to renewable energy is probably an easy answer for most people today because there's a cost neutrality or a cost advantage. But the more difficult decisions come in supply chain, in transportation, in changing core processes, changing refrigerants at other companies. So these, I think, are kind of the journey that people are going through, and AI and technology can actually share the spotlight and crunch the time to making decisions on where to spend time and money.
Right. So in practice, the process can be much complicated than just like using renewable energy.
That's right. I think renewable energy is just the very first no-regret move for every company. But actually, the changing of physical supply chain, physical infrastructure, is where most of the companies are actually spending their time today thinking about decarbonization. I don't think AI can go and substitute the hard work needed, but AI can accelerate the journey to say, don't spend time doing the wrong things. Spend time doing the right things, and let me get you there within a few months to get you to those answers.
Parag, what?
Sure.
Yeah.
I really like what Maya said, because it's just a reminder that I was characterizing the global ecosystem as this incredibly complex, unpredictable, dynamic, and the most complex thing that we have built in the physical world is actually our global supply chain networks and infrastructure and the internet itself, right? So we'd say global climate, internet, supply chains, right? In terms of what are the most complex things that we can identify in our own material world. And so what Maya's doing, what Terrascope is doing, is really trying to untangle that and quantify that at every node, which is God's work. It's so complicated. We are the physical, climate, geographical counterpart to Terrascope, AlphaGeo. And so what we're doing is looking at every place in the world, every actual physical patch of dirt, earth, every city, every building, and saying, what is climate change, climate volatility, as we like to say, rather than just climate change, because it is so unpredictable. What is climate volatility going to mean for this place in terms of floods, heat waves, droughts, fires, hurricane, coastal inundation over the next 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 50, 100 years. From a regulatory standpoint, more and more, you do have to run physical risk models out to the year 2100 if you can, so we automate that, and it's there. Now that matters because sometimes it's overlooked when we're focusing so much on decarbonization, as we must, but the damage is already being done. It's not that we live in a kind of bubble and get to just wait until we reduce emissions and then the world will be perfect. The volume or the amount of damage from natural disasters, particularly hurricanes and floods worldwide, is increasing by $10 to $20 billion a year, and it is well over $200 billion a year, every single year. Bloomberg will always have at least 1 or 2 articles a year about this and tracking how bad any given hurricane season worldwide has been. And so it's not just that, well, things reset and everything retains the same value. land and real estate are the largest sector of the entire world economy. We tend to think of the world economy as something so dematerialized and digital. Well, actually, nothing. All the value of all the stock exchanges and currencies and on Earth and even crypto doesn't hold a candle to the value of just land and real estate, which is an estimated $350 trillion. And we started with the realization just a few years ago that it's gone up and to the right. Think about your net worth and your savings and assets as a family or a household. It's gone up and to the right for decades, if not centuries. But because of climate change, it won't. Right? It won't. There are places that will become obsolete and have become and will become obsolete overnight. They will not just go up and to the right. In fact, you will have what Mark Carney popularized the phrase climate Minsky moments. Right? You will have a very sudden write down in those asset values. The end of the speculative bubble will come faster than expected. Or, as I guess Mark Twain famously, to paraphrase from one of his novels, how did you go bankrupt gradually then suddenly? Right? And that's what's happening on those. So the arbitrage that companies, in a very practical world, real estate investors, any operator of any factory, supply chain industry, needs to look at the physical locations of their assets and worry about what is the value of those places going to be, and then arbitrage them and rebalance their portfolio. So that's how our clients use it. They're constantly rebalancing their physical exposure in light of climate models.
Amazing. When I thought about climate change prediction, I always think about predicting typhoon path. But obviously, what your company is doing is more powerful or capable than just predicting one scenario, right? It's like multiple scenarios put together. How does your clients evaluate all the things going on? Great. So let's pull back to the polling results. Let's see how you guys the audience are thinking about this question. Okay, so we are mostly, 63% of the audience say AI is going to save it. Are you guys agree with this result?
Do you want to go first or should I?
You first.
Okay. I am generally an optimist, okay? But I say I'm an optimist with a caveat here. I think that we save the world with AI, with innovations. I'm actually quite clear with that. But the caveat I put is that we collectively as a business community have to be quite demanding for doing this the right way. Why do I say that? The energy consumption of AI does worry me, right? And my company uses AI models. We, even as a small company, as a startup that's been around for 2.5 years, we're actually thinking about what should our green procurement policies look like. And we think that there is a sense of responsibility that innovation should bring to the table. And this is where my caveat lies. Who has buying power in the room with the largest tech companies, with the largest cloud companies? How do we actually demand for responsible advancement of AI? How do we ensure that data center usage will grow, but how do you actually ensure that renewable energy powering, cooling of the data center is responsible? So that's the caveat I have. I am an optimist. I do believe in how tremendous the power of AI can be in bringing productivity, accelerating change. But I think it doesn't happen without us being demanding around responsible advancement of AI with energy and energy consumption particularly.
I think the problem can be solved in the sense that we can reduce emissions. It doesn't mean that our ecosystem resets to what it was in the industrial and pre-industrial era. Nothing of the sort is going to happen, right? Again, in complex systems, the past is a bad guide to the future. Tomorrow doesn't look like yesterday. So we have to look for and find that new equilibrium. And I do think we can. I think it's within our reach, even with or without AI. It would be conceivable simply through pragmatism and common sense. So I'm not necessarily an optimist or a pessimist. I'm a technocrat, right? I believe in data. I believe that if we have transparency and if we're guided by that data, then we would make the right decisions. We work with some very large asset owners, sovereign wealth funds, pensions, and they have a lot of leverage. And the more informed they become, the more they educate themselves, the more transparent the data is to them, the more they're going to exert pressure through the financial system. to encourage investors to start to steer things in the direction of sustainable practices. So I think we'll eventually get there. Again, we would get there faster if there were a global, Maya and I were talking about this earlier, right? If there were some kind of a global regulatory system when it comes to climate, but we don't have it. We only have a normative set of efforts, right, around declarations and targets and goals, but nothing that's binding, truly binding on a global level. To the extent that we try to get there with things like carbon border adjustment taxes and trade, it becomes very controversial. And then there's still lots of hidden, kinds of ways in which it doesn't ultimately necessarily have a huge impact. Remember that irrespective of, given how inadequate our regulatory dynamics are, time is ticking away, right? We're reaching 60 gigatons, right, of emissions every single year, and that's cumulative, right? So year on year, we have a lot to answer for and a lot to deal with, and regulations alone aren't going to solve it. It's going to be through technology, AI being just one part of that, but more broadly, radical investments in clean technology and technology transfer worldwide to make it affordable for companies, industries to do the right thing. That's going to be the most important part of the solution.
I can actually echo with what Maya just said, because of the data center power consumption is huge, right? It's like it's kind of creating its own problem.
Yeah.
Right. So, and also we talked about how this, multinationals, large companies are having concerns like investing in renewable energies and all these technologies to make their company like more like eco-friendly, let's say. I want to know what's your idea about Southeast Asia, in this part of the world, where probably the technology could be there, but there are lots of concerns about how the policymakers are making their decisions to meet the eco-friendly technologies more applicable in this part of the world. I want to hear your ideas about this.
Yeah, I think the flip side of what we talked about, which is the risk of energy consumption and the problem created by AI. The flip side of that is you think about technology overall being an enabler and a horizontal enabler of decarbonization, if they get it right, across many sectors. Similarly with energy, similarly with packaging, similarly with transportation. So there are these sectors, including technology and AI, that are horizontal enablers. And so if I were a policymaker in this region and in the world, that's how I would look at it. And I think that there are parts of policymaking in this part of the world which are encouraging, and where I think a lot of governments in and around Southeast Asia have started to focus on is local data center policies. How do you actually think about data centers and greening of data centers for the tropics? The way data centers have been designed in the past has been really focused around Western market principles and applied to here. But actually, do we need to keep the temperature as low as it is? How do we cool it differently? How do we actually have better procurement principles for the hardware that we put in the data centers? So I think that's where I would sort of expect to see policymakers lean in and really look at technology as a horizontal enabler and say, how do you set up responsible capabilities? The good news is that countries in our region have signed up for their net zero goals, which means that they cannot very often achieve their net zero goals if they don't take these horizontal sectors and ensure that greening of these sectors has happened, including greening of AI or greening of technology and data centers. So I think that's where I hold out hope that the policymakers will think about this top down, just like any enterprise has to, right? You're seeing the challenges, like the minute you set your SBTI target, your science-based target, you're committed, and every year you're testing yourself and saying, am I moving the needle? Same with our countries, right? Some moving faster than the others, but that's, I think, the approach that I would see them take.
Right. The key, I'll just add to the key phrase there is top down, right? So we definitely don't have it globally. Even Asia, and I'm glad you're spotlighting Asia, not least, of course, because we're here, but you have 5 billion people, 40-something countries, huge gaps in state capacity and inequality, very different regulatory standards. The solution to Asia's climate problems, we have the largest number of people and largest volume of, or amount of GDP, and the largest, we are ground zero for global industry and for global infrastructure investment. Everything is here in Asia. The problem is not going to be solved in Brussels. It's not going to be solved in Washington. It has to be solved here. We need something of a regional technology transfer mechanism because there's huge amounts of innovation here in Asia. Companies like Maya's and mine, right? As simple examples that can actually push that technology through. And Asia has to harness the data that Asia has to start to tackle its own challenges of climate risk.
Very well said. With that, I think time is bet on us. Let's wrap up this session and let's give us the round of applause to the great panelists here today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.